Looks like we're expecting someone else, but no, there's enough personality on stage right now with Andy to fill both seats. No worries. Andy Rabens, he's the special advisor for youth issues for the U.S. State Department. This entails him going around the world to connect people of a certain age, but perhaps young at heart as well, to ensure that we work together to build a prosperous future, because ultimately we face a lot of the same challenges as we have seen with the recent incidences in Paris and elsewhere. So with that, I'd like to say welcome to Andy, to Kuala Lumpur, and welcome to everyone here. We're going to have a short presentation by Andy, followed by a Q&A session. So please hold your questions until the end, and I hope that you guys have plenty of questions for Andy then, and be sure to introduce yourself when you ask your question later. But with that said, Andy, take it away.
Well, thank you, Sophie. Ladies and gentlemen, Selamat Tangahari. Good afternoon. How's everybody feeling? We just had a coffee break. We've had a good day so far. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all today in Kuala Lumpur at the ASEAN Young Leaders Summit. And I first want to just give a big thanks to Minister Khairi and the Malaysian government for convening such an impressive group of young leaders from across the ASEAN region and beyond. You know, leadership is one of the tenets of this summit, and I think it doesn't get any better than Minister Khairi and his team in terms of demonstrating and modeling what leadership can look like for us. My name is Andy Rabens. I'm the Special Advisor for Global Youth Issues at the U.S. Department of State in the Office of the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. It's a role that's focused on helping the U.S. government connect with young people overseas to help solve some of the pressing challenges of the day, but also to build greater connectivity and networks to shape that world of tomorrow, a world that we will very soon inherit. In this very room today, we've got nearly 300 young leaders representing not only the 10 ASEAN countries, but 10 dialogue partners from leading countries around the globe. So this convening offers a unique opportunity for many of us to connect with one another, to try and identify shared values and goals that unite us, and to start modeling a type of engagement that we envision within this increasingly interconnected world. Now, I'm a fierce optimist about the future, and I think a lot about the world as it could be. A world full of possibility, of prosperity, of equal opportunity, where each and every one of us are pursuing our passions, utilizing our talents, and working collaboratively across cultures and countries to solve some of the pressing challenges of the day. But I'm also a realist, and I recognize that it's going to take some hard work to get there. So today, I'd like to talk about a few steps that we can all take to start shaping that world as it could be. First, I'm going to talk about the need to find our passions and develop our talents. Second, I'll touch on the importance of connecting our passions to one another, starting in this room and then expanding globally. And third, I'll close with a concept called e pluribus unum, out of many one, a mindset and belief that we're all in this together. As a rising generation of global youth leaders, whether it's tackling ISIL, combating climate change, working to end poverty, or amplifying youth voices across the globe. So I want to begin by talking about the importance of identifying your passion and developing the skills necessary to align with that passion. It's kind of funny how life works sometimes, because we don't control the hand that we're initially dealt. I'd argue that a global lottery exists at birth, and it's the luck of the draw where and to whom we're born. Some of us are born into families of great wealth and power. Others are born into families of poverty, problems, and struggle. Some of us are born into environments of peace and educational opportunity, while others are born into communities of conflict. But today, because of technology, smartphones, and heightened interconnectedness, we can see into other parts of the globe. We can explore ideas and people outside of our communities. And we can pursue passions and talents from afar, irrespective of where you were born, who you were born to, or what innate talents or lack thereof you were born with. To give a quick personal example, I'll tell you that I wasn't born with talents to be at this podium today. I was born with a serious lisp, a speech impediment. Growing up, I couldn't say R's, S's, SH's, and the worst letter combination for me was the DR, the dr sound. Unfortunately, my parents, who I love to death, happened to name me Andrew with the DR, friend center, smack in the middle. So growing up, it caused all sorts of problems when I couldn't actually say my own name, Andrew. It came out as Andu. When I was in 3rd grade, I changed my name from Andrew to Andy, and that's where it's been ever since. I went to speech therapy for years growing up and have spent a lot of time since working to overcome my fears, to develop my voice, and to build the confidence that I had something to say. But this process of trying to find and develop my own voice led to my passion of wanting to help other young people find, develop, and mobilize their voices. I wouldn't say that politics and public diplomacy were a natural fit for a slightly goofy-looking redheaded kid who had trouble saying his own name, but it's what I became passionate about. And I've worked hard to develop some skill sets that align with that passion. Because empowering youth voices is what gets me up in the morning. It's what lights me up during the day, and it's what gets me excited. Now, do folks in this room, do you feel like you've connected with your passions? Yes, no? Do people feel like you're developing skill sets to align with those passions? Yeah? Do people feel pressure from either your families or from your communities to follow a particular path? My dad's a doctor, so don't lie, come on. So it reminds me of a story of a young lady named Zin from Myanmar, who actually was the introducer for President Obama in June for the YSEALI, the Young Southeast Asia Leaders Initiative. Zin was an aspiring journalist from Myanmar, and she talked about her parents putting a lot of pressure on her to follow a path as a government pharmacist. She said, no way, the politics in Myanmar are too interesting, I'm gonna pursue my passions of journalism. And just last week, I couldn't help but think about Zin as she's covering the historic events that are happening in Myanmar right now. So I think we've got to stick with what lights you up. I believe that as young global leaders today, we can unite around the idea that we may not control the hand we're initially dealt, but we do control how we respond to that hand. And that while we might not all be born with incredible innate talents, when we pursue our passions, we all have a meaningful role to play. But we also have to recognize that the pressing challenges of today, from countering ISIL to combating climate change, to alleviating poverty and empowering youth and women voices, these challenges are far greater than any one of us can tackle on our own. They require a coalition of talents, a coalition of voices, and a coalition of passions to take action on. If we're going to develop and implement innovative solutions to some of these challenges, we're going to have to find ways of pooling our voices, combining our talents, and connecting our passions together. Now, from an ASEAN regional perspective, there are 400 million voices, young voices, that can connect with each other and have a meaningful impact in tackling some of the pressing challenges of today. Connecting youth voices across the ASEAN region is part of the reason why President Obama launched the Young Southeast Asia Leaders Initiative, YSEALI, in Manila in December of 2013, and why the US government is hosting a YSEALI summit this upcoming week right here in Kuala Lumpur. It's why we built a YSEALI network that has grown to more than 50,000 members, with nearly 1,700 young leaders taking part in YSEALI exchanges and regional workshops. And YSEALI fellows are not only connecting with one another, but they're developing action items to take concrete initiatives and action on issues in their communities and countries back home. Just last week, 89 YSEALI fellows were in the United States, and they were working on topics ranging from helping women from low-income communities right here in Malaysia find work, improving free legal aid for persons with disabilities in Vietnam, and building vibrant networks for youth to have a greater voice in Myanmar. As the US government, we believe that young ASEAN voices need to be heard, and that by combining talents and passions, you can be a powerful partner in tackling some of the regional and global issues of the day. And that's why we're also excited that here at this very summit, there's going to be an ASEAN Youth Manifesto that's going to be created, and we're looking forward to both reading these ideas and to working with you going forward on them. But this summit is not just about ASEAN voices, as there are 10 additional delegations present, including China. China here? Russia, India, Canada, Australia, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Timor-Leste, all right? And my very good friends from the United States. So when you combine the collective youth voices that these countries represent on top of the 400 million youth voices from ASEAN, we're talking about nearly 2 billion voices represented in this room alone. 2 billion voices that can come together to tackle some of the pressing challenges of today. And while we may not all fully agree on every political solution to every complex issue, we can agree on many things. We can agree that our anger and disgust is real with the recent Paris attacks, and that we need to combat ISIL. We can agree that climate change is a real thing, and that we as young people can do something about it. We can agree that poverty can be ended in our lifetime. It can be ended in the next handful of years. We agree that there's utility in empowering youth voices, and we can agree that diversity is something to be celebrated and not hidden. With one voice, you can certainly have an impact. With the 300 voices in this room, you can have a truly meaningful impact. With the 400 million voices across the ASEAN region, you can have a profound impact. But with the 2 billion voices that the folks in this room represent, we can have a transformative impact on the world as we see it. But to be successful still, we need to embrace the mentality of e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And Minister Kyrie actually touched on this theme earlier today in his remarks. Does anyone in this room have any American money on them? Anyone? Anyone have an American dollar? If you have an American dollar, take it out real quick. Too expensive. Take the dollar out and turn it on its back, and you'll see there's an eagle. Above the eagle is a motto. It says, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And this stems from the 13 American colonies and now 15 American states that are bound together as a union, as the United States of America. But e pluribus unum is not just an American concept. It's the idea that when we combine efforts around a common goal, whether it's to form a more perfect union or to tackle a shared challenge, we have power. We have power in numbers, and we have power in combining. So we have a unique opportunity over the next few days to unite around our common goals and model for our leaders what this interconnected world could look like. We have a chance to pool the talents and voices, not just from the 400 million ASEAN voices that are represented in this room, but the 2 billion voices represented from the 20 countries present. We can be the generation that destroys ISIL and wipes out the appeal of extremism once and for all. We can be the generation that commits ourselves to combating climate change. We can be the generation that refuses the lottery of birth to determine one's prospects in life. We can be the generation that ends poverty once and for all, and that expands youth opportunity for young people across the globe. We can be the generation that builds upon our individual passions and talents to solve some of the pressing challenges of the day. We can be all these things, but only if we combine forces and if we do it together. So I'd like to close with a short Malay proverb, that some of you may already be familiar with. It's a proverb that reminds us that clapping the right hand only will not produce a noise. Anyone know that? Okay. So friends, as the largest and most empowered generation the world has ever seen, we're ready to produce some noise. We're ready to tackle the big challenges of today, and we're ready to change the world for the better. But to make the noise we want, we can't just clap our right hand. We need to tap into the hands, the talents, and the voices of everyone in this room. With the mentality of e pluribus unum, out of many one, and an affirmation that we're all in this together. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and let's get to work.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that rousing delivery. I think this is where you have to do a high five, because this more appropriately represents what you've just described, where it's through collective action and shared purpose, through that high five, you and I have been able to do an act. And that's what all of us here can do today. So I'd like to open the floor now to any questions that you may have for Andy. Any questions at all?
Hello.
Great. If you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, can you see me? Hi, Andy. My name is Taki. I was in the States for 4 years for my undergrad. First question I have
Maybe
is...
which nation are you representing today?
Malaysian delegate. Sorry about that. First question I have is that your opinion on the Republican primary, who do you think would win, and what does it mean for ASEAN, the consequences of it? Okay, that's the first question. I know it might be difficult, but it's also a second question. Just observing the social reforms that America has been doing, such as equality of marriage, as well as decriminalization of minor drug offenses. Do you think ASEAN should also follow in America's social reform footstep? Thank you very much.
What was the second one? Sorry.
Social reforms.
Social reforms. Okay. Great. Well, Taki, first I need to hear who you're pulling for. Who are you rooting for the Republican primary?
I was studying in Illinois, Blue State, so it's quite indifferent to me. But I hope there's one candidate who doesn't win, though.
Okay.
My personal opinion.
So I obviously work for the U.S. government, so I can't take a stand on the Republican primary. But I can use my diplomatic hat to get me out of that question. But I will say it's a fascinating time. If you haven't had a chance to watch the United States political environment right now, there's both a primary election on both the Republican side, with about, I think, still 12 or 13 candidates, including Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, a lot of both incredibly accomplished politicians, but a lot of new players who have never been in politics before in their lives, who are entering into the political process. And the debates have been amazing to watch. There's been a lot of fireworks, and they've gotten incredible TV ratings for everyone they've had. And on the Democratic side as well, you have Hillary Clinton, you have Bernie Sanders, and you have Martin O'Malley, who was the former governor of Maryland. So there are two simultaneous primary elections happening, and it's going to be a fascinating next year to see how these elections unfold. I will say, though, that for young people, that primaries and elections are the absolute best time to try to get your voice heard, because candidates are trying to appeal for your vote. So you have a lot of leverage in terms of trying to get issues on the table that they want to kind of work with you on in exchange for their support. So I'd encourage all of you, if you do have elections in your countries coming up, to think about ways of trying to push your issues, hosting debates, and trying to get your voices heard as candidates are coming up with their platforms. And then the question about social issues. I think that I have been fascinated by the way that marriage equality and issues around immigration have become incredibly mainstream in the United States. And social media, if you all have been active on Facebook and Twitter and other platforms, have driven a lot of the social changes in real ways. And I think that there are a lot of lessons learned from what's happened in terms of the pace of marriage equality and immigration reforms that could be applied to your host countries in terms of online and offline organizing efforts to try to push social issues forward.
Andy, before we move to the next question, I see you. I'd just like to get more of a clarification around Taki's question, because I think looking at, for example, President Obama's rebalance to the region, should there be a shift in policy from the U.S. administration, what would that mean then to the region to ensure that we still maintain some type of pathway over years, even if, for example, the administration may not, in the future, be as committed?
From a social issue standpoint?
From just this rebalancing and how ASEAN is seen now as a platform for policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ASEAN region, there has been emphasis from President Obama for this rebalance to Asia. And I think that the launch of the YSEALI program in 2013 and his emphasis and commitment to engaging young people and trying to provide platforms and opportunities to get their voices heard, to get their entrepreneurial and innovative ideas out in the open. A couple years ago, the Malaysian government hosted the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in partnership with the United States and others, and kind of different platforms for making sure that youth voices are getting heard and that youth ideas and innovative efforts are getting amplified and pushed out to a wider audience.
All right, thanks. There's a question on the floor. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Shahira, and I'd like to ask a few questions to Mr. Andy.
And which nation are you representing today?
Malaysia. I'd like to ask a few questions. Firstly, America has been talking about freedom of speech and democracy, etc., whatsoever. And I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, do you, as well as Malaysia had lots of attacks from the Westerns of lacking democracy and journalism, etc., do you think, in your opinion, that Malaysia and most parts of Southeast Asia should actually practice democracy as Western has always preached? Thank you.
It's a softball question, I think. No, I'm joking. It's a great question. It's a challenging question. You know, my view, and I think the view of the U.S. government on this, is that we believe in the U.S., we're trying to create a democracy that provides a lot of fundamental rights to individuals across the nation. And that's something that we believe very dearly in the United States. It's enshrined in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And it's the way that we see kind of the best sense of how you empower voice and opportunity for people in our country. That being said, every country has to figure out their own path. I think we offer up the example of what the United States does to countries around the globe, and I think from time to time we do critique and make comments of other countries' policies when we feel that certain issues bubble up to the forefront. But for the most part, we're trying to work collaboratively with host governments and our partners across ASEAN to ensure that policies are put forth that empower youth voices, that allow young people to be able to organize and get their voices heard in meaningful ways, and then to work with host governments on the right mix of keeping their own culture intact while also pushing fundamental human rights and opportunities for young people to get their voice heard and to organize and to have freedom of religion and some of the other fundamental rights.
Thank you, Mr. Andy.
Thank you, Chihira. Now, in the interest of time, I ask that you please keep your questions short. I see there's a question there and also in the center. We'll start on the left. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Khanh and I'm from Vietnam. And it's our pleasure to be here. And as we know that social network is become more and more dominant, and especially among young people. And I want to ask that, in your opinion, how to raise awareness to the youth while using those tools to gathering the voices, as well as build a national brand and ASEAN brand? Thank you.
That's a great question, Kyan. Thank you for that. I think first you can look again to the leadership up here, and you can look no further than Minister Khairi and his social media prowess. I think he's done a great job of being able to communicate with young people in Malaysia in a two-way conversation on social media platforms. And I think the key to Facebook and Twitter and some of these online platforms is the two-way dialogue and the fact that it's not just used as a mouthpiece for a press release or for a one-way push of ideas. It's really a platform to converse with people across barriers, across language, across culture, and across countries. So I think that to the points discussed earlier today, the possibility for ASEAN to develop its own regional identity could offer up a lot of opportunities to develop some social media platforms that could get people talking in a real way about ideas that they can implement in their communities and countries. So I think a lot of opportunity is there, and I think hopefully I'm looking forward to the social platforms that are launched from the ASEAN region in the years ahead.
Thank you. Question in the center?
Hi, my name is Dietjen, and I'm from Singapore. And so I completely agree with you about imagining the world as what it could be and really working from a place of possibility. And definitely in line with, empowering youth voices. And I think the intention is there. I mean, the work that I do is a lot about amplifying youth voices too, especially particularly on social media. But I'm interested in how you see this being implemented, because I think the plan and the intention is very strong, but how do we actually implement this? And what is the best way that you feel that we could implement this empowerment of youth voices and connecting passions and talents and skills?
Great. I think that's a number of things have to happen at the same time. But I think most importantly, I think it's getting everybody in this room and in our networks and our wider, frankly, countries. You think about that 2 billion number that we represent in this very room, getting us to really push forward on the issues that we care about. And nobody knows best about what would work than the people living day in and day out in a particular community. So I think it's finding a way to pull the greatest ideas and innovative solutions to the problems that we face, and then helping to push forward, push back those actionable solutions and working with stakeholders on the ground who actually will carry these out day in and day out. So I think that's really one of the main keys to figuring out how we can push forward on this stuff.
Thank you very much. Now,
and I would love, I think a platform too, the ASEAN Manifesto, the Youth Manifesto, I think is a great opportunity to try to dig down and showcase what some of these could look like. And I think lastly, before we move on, I think the fact that we have young leaders from Russia and China and India and all these other countries where we don't often have a chance to engage, I think this is a really opportune moment to figure out where are the issues that bind us together and where are the opportunities to push forward as a much larger region as well.
Thanks. And just being mindful of the agenda, because we do have to push on with the rest of the day. What I'd like to do is have three of you quickly share your question, and thereafter, Andy, if you could give your closing remarks in answer to those questions. So 1, 2, 3, and then we'll wrap. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carolyn. I'm part of the Canadian delegate.
Go Trudeau.
I'm currently working in development, and I live in Lao PDR. And I definitely agree with your finding your passions and your talents and combining those together. But I wondered what you would say to those youth where they want to combine their passions and talents, but the resources just aren't there for them.
Thank you. In the center?
Hi, my name is Kevin from Malaysia. And then I have a question for Sir Andy. As for the global youth issue, we know that the drug is the biggest threat toward youth nowadays. So what do you think we need to do to solve these problems? Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, in the side there?
Hello, I'm Rajiv from Indonesia. My simple question is, youth is never be listened by old men, senior, or incumbent people. So as the youth, how can we solve this problem? Is it? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your questions. That's a great one because, Hey, the youth voice has got to be heard, right? Okay, Andy.
Okay, I'm going to close on Raji's. I'll start with Carolyn from Canada. And first, I just want to make a note for the Canadian delegation that if you saw a picture of the most recent, of the new Prime Minister in Canada, Trudeau, of his cabinet, it is the most diverse, incredible looking cabinet with 50% men, 50% women, and a mix of all of the different pieces of what Canada has to offer. So I think that's a model that I think a lot of countries can actually look forward to emulating. The question
is 2015.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. The question of resources for young people who are trying to pursue their passions. I think once you identify those passions, there are clearly cases where you're coming from communities, families, whatever that might be, where resources aren't available at your fingertips. So I think we, as a larger group, have, I think, a duty and an opportunity to help those people who don't have the resources find the folks that do have the resources to be able to help push them forward. I think a lot of the, there are plenty of resources out there. And I think the gap between rich and poor has gone, as a globe, has widened over the past generation, unfortunately. So I think one of the things that folks in this room can do concretely is trying to identify where some of those resources might lie and how to get some of those resources to the people who need them most if they're pushing forward on a positive path. So I think that's something that collectively maybe should be explored in the ASEAN Manifesto, Youth Manifesto going forward. The question from my Malaysian friend about drugs. Drug use is something I think that every country wrestles with. We wrestle with the use of drugs in the United States. I'm sure you all wrestle with drugs issues here in Malaysia. And I think it's similar actually to to young people who feel that are getting drawn down pathways of extremism and other more darker roads. And I think it's a sense of not having a clear excitement in what the future holds, or feeling like you need an outlet and you revert to drugs as opposed to sports or extracurriculars or something that's a little more positive. So I think there are a lot of lessons learned from different parts of the globe, and I think finding ways to provide positive alternatives to people and setting up programs that provide some excitement, I think could be a stem against drug use, against extremism, against providing that more positive, uplifting pathway for youth. And then the question that I think we'll probably close on, the last question.
It's
how can youth reach out to their elders? I think one of the real challenges with, I think Ahmed Al-Hindawi earlier referenced, is that I think too often today, the older generation often sees young people as a source of instability and kind of through a lens of fear. And I think that some of that is warranted. And when you think about what's happened in Paris and what's happened in the extremism space, it often, unfortunately, is young people who are both taking horrific actions and also bearing the brunt of the actions. So I think the onus is partly on us as a younger generation to be willing to connect with the older generation and to show through actions and through dialogue and through listening that we could be that positive driver to help them see us through a lens of economic progress, as a partner for innovation, through kind of a partner for good governance, as trying to kind of let them play that mentor role for us. I think millennials across the globe, young people kind of born after 1980, millennials, that's a term that is used often in the United States, have a role as being the me generation, as kind of just thinking about themselves, and if they're not CEO after 2 years in the job or prime minister after 4 years in government, that kind of they haven't made it. So I think it's also on us to really be willing to listen and to be mentored and to learn what we can from the older generation as we're pushing forward as a collective group.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy, for your insights today. It truly is inspiring. Now, as he said, this is about out of many, one, because ultimately why you are here is because you do feel an obligation of sorts, as well as the desire to find a way to have meaningful, transformative impact. Now, Andy is going to be available to you guys later if you have other questions. As you can see, he's very much about building connections. So be sure to reach out with any other comments that you have. Andy, it's been such a pleasure, and have a wonderful rest of the day, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie and Mr. Andy. To all delegates, please remain in the hall because the next session will convene immediately. And now I would like to invite Mr. Lokman Hakim Ali, Deputy Secretary General of Ministry of Youth and Sports Malaysia, to give a token of appreciation to our distinguished speaker and also dedicated moderator. To Ms. Sophie Kamarudin, thank you very much. And to Mr. Andy Rabens. Thank you very much, sir. I would like to invite